As you're probably aware, music fads come and go pretty frequently as time goes on. The genres that are popular one day can just as easily be scrubbed completely from the charts by the next. The music industry is one of the foremost places that remind us of just how fleeting things can be sometimes. Of course, you do have some genres that have stood the test of time and figure to continue doing so in the future, namely pop, hip-hop, country, classical music, and I guess rock. I think rock will always be around in some capacity. But today, I want to talk to you about some genres that were super popular in their day, but have since died out completely. Now, in order to be considered for this video, it has to be a distinct genre with easily recognizable traits that has gone over a decade without producing any real hits. Through this process, I have narrowed it down to 10 of the most notable extinct music genres, and I'm going to be discussing what I think the last hit song from each of them was. Hit is obviously a broad term, so I'm considering a true hit to be something that not only charted well, but left a lasting cultural impact of some sort. And I won't be considering songs from modern times that are simply homages or copies of older styles. For example, Greta Van Fleet might make music that could qualify as classic rock, but I don't think anybody would consider them an actual classic rock band. They didn't exist in the time period, and their style is mainly just a callback to that genre. Without further ado, let's get into it. Good old classic rock, the go-to music genre for boomers everywhere, like me. Obviously, rock music comes in all shapes and sizes, but for the quintessential classic rock radio-sounding stuff, it's safe to say that was on its way out right around the end of the 80s, as it would slowly get phased out by the likes of the grunge and Britpop movements. If you want to use specifically 1989 as the cutoff for classic rock, then the most obvious choices would be stuff like Free Fallin' by Tom Petty, Rockin' in the Free World by Neil Young, or Crossfire by Stevie Ray Vaughan. While any of those would be fitting choices for the last hit, I think cutting it off in 1989 ignores several later options that can easily fit into the classic rock definition, most notably Thunderstruck by AC/DC. It would also leave out arguably the last great classic rock band in the Black Crowes, whose 1990 album Shake Your Moneymaker saw tons of success, and gave us such jams as Twice as Hard, Hard to Handle, and She Talks to Angels. Also in 1990, you had High Enough by the Damn Yankees, which may be cheating a little bit since this was a rock supergroup that came off as more of a tribute band than an actual band. But I do really like this song, so I feel it is worthy of mention. If you're willing to stretch the end date a little further down the line, then maybe Kenny Wayne Shepherd's Blue on Black from 1997 could be in consideration, another song that I absolutely love. But for my pick as the last stand for classic rock, we are shockingly going to have to travel into the new millennium. I know, this is another supergroup made up of Scott Weiland and members of Guns N' Roses, so you would be justified in claiming that this song doesn't count. It also stands to reason because individually, none of these musicians ever really occupied classic rock, with Scott Weiland hailing from grunge and Slash and the Gang coming from a more hair, glam rock background, of course. So with all this taken into consideration, added with the fact that it was released in 2004, you would really expect the song to sound a little different, right? But no, it sounds like this. In my opinion, Fall to Pieces is one of the best rock songs of the entire 21st century, because it is one of the few from this time that manages to sound timeless. This song would fit in just as perfectly in 1984 or 1994 as it does in 2004. Even though, once again, we've got more of an all-star band than an actual band, this song does not come across as a tribute or a rehash. This is not an ode to classic rock. This is classic rock. This would be right at home on any classic rock radio station. And it truly is the last of its kind, as any rock song released after this one, good or bad, just fails to capture the same kind of timelessness.
Cut my life into pieces, this is my last resort.
I'll admit, nu metal has never been my favorite genre, and as such I've never really been that invested in its history. But it was culturally significant enough in its day to belong on this list. Nu metal kind of occupied this awkward space in music history when grunge finally burned out and people didn't really know how to handle it. Nu metal was pretty much just pop punk for cool kids. You know, the type to sport frosted tips and orange sunglasses. If we want to find exactly when nu metal went extinct, we first have to find the moment it stopped being cool. And there's no clearer culprit to that than Metallica's 2003 album, Saint Anger. Metallica wasn't even a nu metal band. Hardly. But something about this style being performed by a bunch of guys in their 40s just dealt the genre a crushing blow it would never recover from. Nu metal did manage to hang on for a few more years, with some notable candidates for its last hit being Coming Undone by Korn, or Sweet Sacrifice by Evanescence, or Inside the Fire by Disturbed. Once these songs came and went, it was radio silence for nu metal for several years. Most of the general public would have probably considered it dead at this point. But we got one final blip in the radar in 2015.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
Somehow this eventually outshined the rest of Disturbed's discography and became their most successful hit. It even has over 1 billion views on YouTube. Yeah, I don't like this song. I think it's a shameless cover of an already super famous song, and it manages to take a page out of Limp Bizkit's book and just do it even worse. Personal feelings aside, this song was undeniably a hit, and the last of its kind. And it sucks that an entire generation of angsty cringe lords now point to this version of the song before the original. Of course, we can't forget about pop punk, the yin to nu metal's yang. Music for guys that would probably get beat up by the nu metal fans. Anyway, I know pop punk and emo are technically two distinct genres, but I don't really care. There's enough overlap that I think grouping them together works just fine. Unlike nu metal, pop punk never really came across as cool. In fact, one of its most alluring qualities was that it was so decidedly uncool. But as with all fads, there comes a point where the charm simply runs out. And that's what happened to pop punk right around the turn of the 2010s. This was a trickier entry to figure out because recently pop punk has enjoyed a bit of a resurgence thanks to guys like Machine Gun Kelly. Even though I wouldn't count that as genuine pop punk, it is nice to see that the fan base is still alive and well, even if the genre isn't. So I wasn't going to consider any of that for this list, and I also wasn't going to consider any of Fall Out Boy or Panic at the Disco's hits from the past decade, because at this point, these songs are so divorced from the pop punk sound that calling them that would be complete blasphemy. No, I'm looking for good old-fashioned skater boy, spiky hair, Bruce Wayne singing in the shower, honest to God, pop punk. When did that finally go away? If we're looking at the point in which the genre got too oversaturated, we could say it happened with Dear Maria Count Me In by All Time Low, or Fall For You by Secondhand Serenade, or Sing by My Chemical Romance. Originally I had decided on 21 Guns by Green Day being my pick for the last true pop punk and emo hit, considering all the symbolism at play. It's Green Day, one of the pioneers of the genre, and it's the last song by them that's any good, so it made sense. But right as I was about to call it a day, one cursed song suddenly broke its way back into my brain.
So why do good girls like bad guys? I have this question for a real long time.
This song is pretty much just a meme now. I mean, how could it not be? I understand that this song, as well as the band itself, is in on the joke and goes about things ironically, which means I can't really criticize it. The song is bad, obviously, but beyond that, it shows what really caused the genre to die out. It had gotten so ridiculous that not even its own acts could help from making fun of it. Pop punk was at its peak when everyone took it 100% seriously, and now that that was gone, the genre could not survive any longer. There's no worse fate in music than becoming a meme. There's no coming back from that.
Soulja Boy, I'm in it. Why me crack it? Why me roll? Why me crack that Soulja Boy? That Superman? That
Is there anything that screams the decade of the 2000s more than this? Crunk is basically just the personification of dumb fun. Anytime you hear Lil Jon on the track going, yeah, you know the party's about to get started. Crunk was tailor-made for high school age millennials, so naturally once they grew up, Crunk sort of fell by the wayside. Shocking that a genre made up entirely of Lil Jon's didn't have a very long shelf life. Apart from the more recognizable dance floor bops, most of this genre was just bad to begin with, which makes it really tough to find when the last crunk hit was. It's hard to narrow down when the genre started going bad, because it was already pretty bad. Wikipedia would tell you that the last crunk hit was Ice Cream Paint Job by Doro, even though it was a very modest success and nobody remembers it today. Kind of like with pop punk, there's been flashes of crunk in more modern music, such as All Hands on Deck by Tinashe and My Type by Saweetie. But in the same way as before, I would consider these songs to be more homages than actual crunk. I think if you want to find the end of crunk as a super big deal in the mainstream, you have to look at the man himself, VIC. I spent my whole life before this video confusing him with Soulja Boy, and can you blame me? Their stuff sounds really similar. I think VIC's 2008 album Beast is the best place to look as the end of the road for crunk, when it was on its way out but still commanded a decent amount of attention. We could point to the ever ridiculous Get Silly, but I think I can do you one even better. To be fair, at least crunk didn't go out sad like nu metal or pop punk. This is a certified banger. It showcases everything that made crunk great. It had a danceable beat, it was simple enough that anyone could follow along, and like I said before, it was just dumb fun, of the highest order. Honestly, I don't know why this genre didn't last longer. I feel like we've been sorely missing this kind of mindless, fun dance music in today's day and age. Maybe it was the outfits.
Sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree?
New wave was one of the preeminent sounds of the 80s and was a staple of the second British invasion. This is one of the more insular genres of the 80s because it sprung into the spotlight right around the turn of the decade and was all but completely gone by the time the 90s rolled around. New wave is very unique in that respect, as it's one of the few music genres that was contained almost entirely to one full decade. Much like classic rock, new wave's final hits came around the 1989-1990 window, with songs like Nothing But Flowers by Talking Heads off their final album. Or if you're willing to look a tad bit into the 90s, you could give the nod to In Your Room by Depeche Mode, at a time when they'd just really become a parody of themselves. Neither of these really satisfied me, so for my pick, I decided to bend the definition of new wave a bit. I know most people wouldn't call The Cure new wave, as they occupy more of a dream pop, art rock, goth kind of niche, but I think they sound similar enough to the other new wave bands that they could easily be in consideration for this list. If we're focusing on The Cure for this segment, then there is no clearer place to look than their seminal 1989 album Disintegration. Generally considered one of the best albums of the 80s as well as all time. Any one of the singles from this album could have been chosen for this spot, as pretty much all of them saw good to great success, especially the final single. While Love Song is most likely The Cure's most famous song nowadays, I think Pictures of You may be their best. It's a moody, 7-minute long lament of lost love. Exactly what I want to see from a band as deliciously melodramatic as The Cure. This whole album's a gem. Seriously, go check it out for yourself. Preferably alone in your room when it's raining. That's how you get the full effect. One important thing to get out of the way now. Funk is not disco. Disco is not funk. I know sometimes it can be hard to distinguish between the two, but trust me, there is a discernible difference. It's often said that funk was the precursor to disco and sort of died out as disco took off. But looking back, the two genres spent several years coexisting independently of each other. Sure, disco eventually overshadowed funk in the mainstream, but funk held its own for a while, enjoying many hits deep into the 70s. Funk and disco's declines both had more to do with the rapidly changing pop scene of the 80s than anything with each other. Some notable later funk hits include Play That Funky Music by Wild Cherry, As by Stevie Wonder, Got to Give It Up by Marvin Gaye, and Brick House by the Commodores. Funk didn't really carry over much into the 80s, and when it did, it typically didn't really sound like funk anymore. Think of acts like DeBarge or Billy Ocean. But there was one song released in 1981 that was still unflinchingly funk. James is genuinely one of the most entertaining singers in music history. Name one singer with more aura than peak Rick James. You can't. Even if You Can't Touch This sampled the beat from this song and has grown to overshadow it over time, I will always hold a special place in my heart for the original. R.I.P. Rick James. You would have loved social media.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields.
Psychedelic rock was very short-lived, as many of the most successful artists in that genre were very short-lived. This is going to become a theme going forward. But on a real note, psychedelic rock didn't go extinct so much as it simply evolved into what we now know as progressive rock, a genre that is still going strong today. Around the early 70s, Pink Floyd was beginning to alter their sound, and bands like King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Genesis were out there creating psychedelic-ish rock, but with just a little more spice. For the final hits of the psychedelic rock era, we could look to Come Together by the Beatles, one of their last songs in this style, or the posthumous album The Cry of Love by Jimi Hendrix, or the final song before Pink Floyd really found their sound, One of These Days. But for my pick, it feels fitting to go with the swan song of one of rock's most intriguing figures.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm.
Psychedelic rock went all sorts of crazy, weird directions in its day, but if you want the template, the most bare-bones version of psychedelic rock, apart from the Beach Boys, the Doors are where it's at. And this song is a great example of that. It sounds so ethereal, like something out of a dream. And I might add, Riders on the Storm is one of the single most killer titles in all of rock. So I extend another RIP to Jim Morrison. You would have loved the Benjamin. I know what you're all thinking. Hair metal died out because of grunge. And while you're right, it wasn't quite as simple as that. Sure, most of the gimmicky, one-off hair metal bands certainly met their expiration date when grunge came around, but there were a select few established bands that held on to the slimmest amount of staying power into the 90s. For a more conventional pick for the last hair metal hit, we could go with either Dr. Feelgood or Kickstart My Heart by Motley Crue, the hair metaliest hair metal band to ever hair, or we could go with Unskinny Bop by Poison. Guns N' Roses is one of those examples of bands from this time period that were popular enough to survive the initial wave of grunge and still find success in the 90s, as arguably one of their best songs came right smack dab in the middle of the rock shift with November Rain. Van Halen is another example, as they also had a successful hit with Right Now, though they fell off almost immediately after this song's release. Really the only other hair band to still have some mojo in the 90s was Def Leppard, and with their run coming to an end alongside hair metal, it's only fitting that they left on a pretty high note. This song was created as a tribute to Steve Clark, former Def Leppard guitarist who tragically passed away in 1991. Even if this song feels like a bit of a retreading of Hysteria, I still rock with it. Hysteria is a great song. I don't mind more songs sounding like it. Stand Up, Kick Love Into Motion is a deeply personal and emotional song, and it manages to stick the landing on Def Leppard's run, as well as putting a final bow on the hair metal craze as a whole.
It's alright. There comes a time.
Oh, grunge. Never before or since has a genre burned so brightly for so little time. While Kurt Cobain's untimely death didn't immediately put a stop to grunge music, it kind of metaphorically did. Coincidentally, almost all of the classic lineup of grunge bands simply stopped releasing good stuff following this tragedy. It was pretty much flop after flop after flop for these bands following 1994, which is truly a pity, since this left the door open for some of the worst music imaginable to steal the spotlight. Either way, the time period immediately surrounding Kurt Cobain's death did give rise to some of the best music released in the grunge era, with Nirvana's final hit song All Apologies, Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden, Don't Follow by Alice in Chains, Better Man by Pearl Jam, and Interstate Love Song by Stone Temple Pilots. As you definitely noticed from these songs, it all just hit a wall in 1994. Nothing released after 1994 was really worth mentioning at all, with one exception. Yes, you're seeing this correctly. A trio of 14-year-olds managed to craft one of the most kick-ass grunge anthems of the whole 90s. After their album Frog Stomp, Silverchair couldn't really keep it up, and so they simply exist as a footnote in 90s music now. But what a footnote it was. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion. I get the feeling that because of how young these guys were, it'd be easy to write them off as a caricature of grunge. But I don't care. This song is awesome, and Silverchair is awesome. Fight me. Last, but certainly not least, we've got the big one, the mother of all extinct music genres, the one that defined its era better than any other genre in music history, disco. Disco is one of the most fascinating moments in time, equally loved and hated, and probably containing a higher concentration of instantly recognizable and iconic songs than any other genre. Much like funk, though, disco ran its course once the 80s came around, so looking at that specific time will definitely get us close to the final hit. Something like Off the Wall by Michael Jackson, his last go-around with disco before releasing Thriller, or stuff along the lines of I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross, Funky Town by Lips Inc., or Let's Groove Tonight by Earth, Wind & Fire. As I've said for many other entries on today's list, there exist exceptions to the supposed end date. Songs like Canned Heat by Jamiroquai or Get Lucky by Daft Punk and Pharrell Williams could very easily be categorized as disco, as they contain all the necessary musical elements. But like before, you know those don't count. They exist in a completely different era than legit disco. They are still worthy of mention though. While 80s pop and disco are very clearly not the same thing, I think for the latest song to be released and still feel like genuine disco, you'd have to travel to 1982.
You dropped the bomb on me, baby. You dropped the bomb on me.
The Gap Band enjoyed plenty of success throughout the 70s and 80s, but these days this song is primarily what they're remembered for. Even in this song, you can kind of hear the 80s influence. It doesn't sound quite the same as other, more traditional disco songs, but I think this would fit perfectly fine at a discotheque in, say, 1975, without too much question. Several genres in this video have failed to stick the landing with their final hit, but disco is not one of them. This song is a certified banger every day of the week. So that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.
I love it when you call me Big Papa. Throw your hands in the air if you's a true player. I love it when